You probably remember in 2016, the polls were off. One of the big problems in 2016 was focusing too much on those national level polls. Clinton did win the popular vote, but she lost the election. In 2020, they were off again. We saw that Joe Biden had a much larger lead than he actually ended up with on election day. So people are probably wondering right now, are the polls going to be accurate this year? Can you trust the polls? And a lot of that has to do with understanding what happened in 2016 and 2020. In 2016, it was those state level polls that really missed the mark. Some of them were way off in Wisconsin, for example, or North Carolina, where the average of the polls showed Hillary Clinton with an advantage there, when in reality, Donald Trump won the state by 4 percentage points. The good news is that pollsters were mostly able to identify what went wrong in 2016, and they made changes to make their polls better. When pollsters are fielding a survey, they're just talking to some people of the population, obviously. They're not talking to everybody in America. And so from that population, they have to adjust how much people's answers are weighted to match the population. But in 2016, a lot of pollsters weren't considering education as one of the things that they weighted for in making those adjustments. White Americans without a college degree ended up being underrepresented in a lot of the samples, and a lot of those people broke for Trump. In 2020, they fixed a lot of these mistakes that they saw from 2016, so they started weighting by education, for example. But then the polls were still off. They overestimated Joe Biden's support, and we still don't really know exactly why that happened. There are a few theories. One is that Trump supporters were less likely to respond to surveys because they were not in places where there were stay-at-home orders during the pandemic. There was also a record turnout of voters in 2020, and that meant that a lot of people who normally don't vote came out to the ballot box. And so it was really hard for pollsters to try to include them in their survey since we don't have a lot of data on people who don't vote. This is always the million-dollar question. Who's gonna actually show up to vote on election day? And it's why pre-election polling is so difficult. Obviously, everybody wants to know now, can we trust the polls in 2024? Are they accurate? Are they more accurate than they were in 2016 and 2020? The really unsatisfying answer is that we won't actually know until after the election. But we can say that in 2022, the midterm polls were some of the most accurate we've seen in decades. So maybe we'll work out that well again in 2024.